Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Let's talk. Right? Right? You've been waiting for it. Let's review it. Tell you what I think. Tell you the good. Tell you the bad. Tell you everything in between that you need to know whether or not Marvel United is for you. Let's do this. Let's just do a brief overview of what Marvel United actually is. Now, Marvel United, CMON, miniature-based, cooperative, pandemic-esque, problem-solving, mitigating type of game. You have a pre-constructed deck of one of any character that you choose, going up against a pre-constructed deck of a villain, taking turns going back and forth between the villain phase and the hero phase. Now, the rules, it's not a complex game. You know, it's not. Let's not kid ourselves. The overhead of this game is very straightforward. You can read the instruction manual in a very short period of time. You are moving around place to place of one of the 6 locations, trying to either save civilians, knock out thugs, deal with threats, or finally taking out the bad guy before you run out of cards, or the bad guy gets through all their cards, or they complete their whatever victory condition that they have. I've basically given you 60% of the game right there. This is one of many Marvel IPs. And it is invariably going to get compared to the other Marvel IPs that are out there, for good and for bad. I will do that myself in this video, because I think you need to know where it falls, and again, how that relates to the pros and the cons. Like I mentioned, this is not a thick rule book. It's great from that standpoint. The expansions even are usually about a page of rules. Now, let's talk pro. Pro, overhead. I can get this to the table with that thin of rules in a very short period of time. I can teach it to anyone that I want. My main gaming partner has been my 7-year-old. But with the small amount of text that is on these cards, and with just a little bit of rules overhead in terms of memory, my 5-year-old is playing with us now as well. But I can play this with my gamer group in addition. That is a huge bonus. I have played this game 20 times now at the time of filming this. 20. So I'm coming from a very deep aspect in this game already. I have played all of the expansions. I have played them all through. I have played the majority, a vast majority of the villains as well, even in the expansion box. I have played a vast majority of this game. Villains, not as many of the heroes, just because of the sheer number. I have the insight now, I feel like, to give you a more full view of things. Another pro, just in terms of something you need to know, is this is Marvel. There is a certain fun factor, if you are a fan of the IP, that this gives. Of the unique decks and the unique characters, the ability to pick and choose and match and take even from between expansions in the first place, as well as villains. That is a huge bonus. So when I want to play with a team of Okoye, Miss Marvel, and Quicksilver against Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet, I can. Or if my kids decide that we are going to play Ghost Rider, Miles Morales, and Vision against the Sinister Six, we can. Again, huge bonus from a fun factor standpoint. And let me be clear, you cannot underemphasize that, especially in terms of quality time with the kids. Other pro, the variability on the villains side of things is great. The villains are one of the highlights of this game. How they interact, what their powers do. Now, you can argue how thematically incorporated some of them are, but they are relatively true to what you would think of when you think of these villains. Mysterio causing you to be confused. Doc Ock laying traps and planning. Red Skull scheming to win. And the variability therein ties straight to the difficulty. And that is another pro. And a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this. I have seen it. I have seen it all over the forums and the comments and the Reddits and the Facebooks. This game is way too simple. And it is simple. But do not mistake simplicity with lack of difficulty at times. We are not by any means winning or steamrolling the majority of these games. The majority of the games, when we win, it comes down to the last turn or 2 or 3. And let me be clear, there's only 12 turns. Also, we are about just over like 50 to 60% win rate. And granted, yes, some of that is because I am playing with my kids. But some of that is also because the game is not difficult. The game is chaotic. It is random. You will get things that just go against you, and there is no way you can fully mitigate that, or it takes masterful mitigation in order to overcome it. And that is a con as well, because plenty of you out there are not going to like the randomness or the chaos that comes with this. Your inability to strategically plan for every outcome or to mitigate anything that you come across is going to drive you crazy. There is no dice rolling, but there is just drawing off of a deck with very little mitigation. Now, several powers can help with that, but that's besides the point. Also, you can just get a bad streak of things. The scaling of some enemies is easier to navigate and to deal with than others. And I say that as someone who has played this solo, but also with up to 4 players. Another pro, and I'm starting out with all the pros just so I can anticipate what some of the cons are and tie them in. Another pro, because of the simplistic, relativistically speaking nature, the time is quick. It is easy to get to the table. Because believe me, there are plenty of nights, whether it's a game group or whether it's with my kids, I don't feel like lugging out something that is going to be extensive or going to be very upkeepy or that is going to be just super long. A solo game, for example, I played the whole Infinity Gauntlet series of 4 in about an hour. But playing with my kids, letting them make their own turns with a 5 and a 7-year-old, we're playing in under half an hour even. And again, that cannot be understated when the whole problem sometimes with our hobby is our inability or the lack of availability of time to get things to the table in the first place. And so in order to do that, it is nice to have a game like this, because there are some nights where I do not feel like pulling out Spirit Island and Aeon's End, which you can make a very good argument, and I will not disagree with you, that these are overall better games, right? But does this make it a lesser game? No. There are other nights I do not feel like Pandemic, where I am constrained to the nurse, the doctor, the whatever. I want to be Nebula with Spider-Man 2099 and Ghost Rider going up against Hela. Because I can just do whatever I want. And I want to throw in the exposed scenario where my secret identity is exposed. Or I want to go up against the Sinister Six. And I can do that. And I can mix and match and get it to the table and make it work and have fun with whatever I want to do in that sense. And it's not the overhead of Spirit Island or Aeon's End or even Pandemic. And let's not say those are massive. But sometimes it's just nice to be able to just, there you go. Oh, I want to rinse and I repeat. I want to play it again into a completely different scenario. I want to change a few things. Everybody has a different hero. Here's a different villain. Here's a different exposure challenge scenario. Oh, we're going to throw in a hidden traitor. There you go. And we've played it now in 45 minutes and done that. Can't do that with Aeon's End. Can't do that with Spirit Island. And that's the X factor, I think, when it comes to the pros. That cannot be discounted. This box is massive. This box, 44 characters, 33 heroes, 11 villains. One of the best values for any game I have seen in a long time. Now let's talk about the cons. Twofold here to begin with. This is Iron Man. You can see with Iron Man here that those are the 4 symbols. And the top card has one of his special abilities. Now, plus minus here. Plus, there's only 4 things you got to know with a little bit of text. Very simplistic, very straightforward. Downside, there's only 4 things. It feels like you could really use an extra symbol in there to give just that much more variability. It does make you feel like the game can play itself a little bit in terms of what choice you're going to make. That is negated a little bit by the sense that you are also getting the actions of the card that was played in front of you by whatever player. So you're getting this action plus this action at the bottom. So that helps. But, as I just showed you, these worded powers are too far and too few between in the hero side of things. As I mentioned with the villains having the unique aspect, the heroes, some of them just do not feel unique because there are only 3 of those symbols. Because there's only so many combinations of things you can do with those 3 symbols. There is not an endless supply of, 4 symbols that you can combine to make differences of. You just can't. And that's where the text comes in. But there's only a few of those in each deck. If there were more of them, if half of the deck had that, because that is what gives the heroes their flavor, and that is where the differences in the heroes' decks come, it would make the heroes all that much better. And that is a big downside, because there are plenty of characters that I have played now that I go, I can't realistically tell, because some of these characters, even the powers are the same. Well, you can't get hurt until the next turn. Well, I mean, I've played probably like 4 or 5 characters that have that, right? That's not really unique enough. But Quicksilver, he dashes and he takes out a guy along the way, or maybe he does a damage along the way to each new area that he does, for example. That is unique to him. I have not seen that anywhere else. And so the inconsistency with which those are applied is a little bit disappointing. Another high and low at the same time is the expansions. As I just showed you, that Kickstarter exclusive stretch goal box is amazing. I'll talk about this more on my Should You Back for the X-Men video, for example. But I will flat out tell you, if you get nothing else, and frankly, the expansions that are good are head and shoulders above the rest. The Infinity Gauntlet and the Sinister Six and the Kickstarter exclusive box. If you went with just those and ignored the other 4 expansions altogether, you would never miss the other 4 expansions unless you wanted a specific character, hero, or villain from one of those boxes. I feel that meh about some of them. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to have them and I like them, but it feels like on one hand you have the Infinity Gauntlet and the rules and the campaign and the depth that went into that and making that with the mechanisms, and then you have the Sinister Six as well with the ingenuity that you're fighting all 6 of them at the same time and how it differs up that formula just enough to make it so different and difficult as opposed to when you're fighting a single villain. And then you sort of have all of the rest of the challenges that are in, the Spider-Man Green Goblin one, Tales of Asgard, the Black Panther. They're all sort of, here's this one little trinket thing that we're going to throw in there. And it doesn't really work as well. I'm not excited to play many of those other additional challenges as much as I am about any of the others, or just playing a random villain. And I guess that is where it comes in, is I could throw any random villain in with the Black Panther challenge or the Spider-Man challenge that is from that expansion, and it would not feel unique. It would not feel like it is drastically different, and it is just not giving me the value or the depth that these other 2 expansions offer. And I wish it did. So that is a huge meh. Another downside, I have to say, is the storage. I mentioned at the beginning, my kids wanted to do Ghost Rider and Vision and Miles Morales. Well, I'm pulling stuff from the core box, from the expansion box, from the Sinister Six box, because that's the challenge they wanted to do, and the Spider-Man box. Right? That's a pain. And the consolidation in this is poor. The space in the expansion boxes is not well utilized. And now I know people have said, yes, the expansion and the other boxes are all designed for sleeved cards. Okay, great. But apart from the custom top that is containing the miniatures, the rest of the storage for this is relatively mediocre at best. I think I'm going to end up inevitably taking out a lot of the stuff and sorting it more like my Marvel Legendary or my Arkham Horror LCG by character with dividers. And so I can just thumb through it that way. And then Frankenstein some sort of storage for the miniatures themselves. And I'd be fine with that because it would save me a heck of a lot of box opening and closing, inevitably. Another con, at the retail level, the core box alone is not going to necessarily show people what this game can truly do if you are judging it by surface value in how easy potentially 2 of the 3 villains are in the first place. Essentially. And so that's going to lead people to get not a great first impression of the game, saying that this is really easy, this is too easy, I don't see why I would want any more of this. And so I don't feel like it showcases it, except for the Red Skull. The Red Skull is the exception in the base game, as well as a couple of the heroes. And the heroes in the base game are actually better comparatively than the villains overall, in my opinion, as a whole. Another con that has to be said is that I did not get the cardboard locations. The locations themselves are a little bit flimsy and they're already starting to get their corners peeled. But I'm not going to pay, I'm actually going to laminate them. And so that's going to solve part of that issue. Again, that's probably going to affect storage, but so be it. So what do I think overall here at the end? I think this is a simplistic, well thought out game with a vast amount of potential that several of the expansions tap into very well. Several leave you wanting. But the sheer variety, the ability to customize, and the ability to adapt how you want, when you want, at kids' ages to gamer ages, makes it a game that is ultimately probably never going to leave my collection. Because that flexibility, that adaptability, even in the simplicity that it is, just is not really filled by any other game. Like I mentioned, in terms of the ability to get it to the table, relief, and the sense of fun it gives when I just want something of that ilk. And then you throw on the Marvel IP on top of that, and it makes it even better. Like I said, could I do without some of the expansions? Absolutely. Am I a little bit irritated some of my favorite characters aren't being utilized to the extent in which I think they could be or should be? Absolutely. Do I feel like some of the expansion challenges are just not nearly fleshed out or given the depth that they should have been comparatively, especially when, and I think this is the most irritating thing, when you show us, Simon, how good it can be with these, and then you do sort of the opposite with the other expansions, that is what infuriates me, because it shows me that the potential and the ability to make something much better is there. It makes me concerned that the effort then is just not there in those other areas. And that, frankly, is disappointing. Disappointing. Because this could be, if the other expansions were given the structure and the depth which those 2 expansions have, this could be, I don't want to say an all-time great game, but you could be talking Board Game Geek Top 100, right? Now, I said at the beginning, I'll compare this to the other Marvel IPs out there, so I will. Where does this fall? It falls squarely in the middle, and let me tell you why. Between Marvel Legendary and Marvel Champions. Marvel Champions is a great solo 1 or 2 player game that is very thinky, has an element of deck construction where you are thinking things out. Now, you can do the pre-constructed decks, but if you really talk to people who play it with any sort of depth or beyond the casual play, they are creating their own decks, which, if you're familiar with deck creation, that takes things to a whole nother level in terms of advanced preparation before you even get to the game, to the table in the first place. But the depth and the greatness that that game has is undisputed, especially with the upcoming expansions coming out that are just giving it more and more and more. But I don't feel like doing that every night. And I'm guarantee that most of you that are even looking at this don't want to do that every night either. Now, let's take the opposite end of things, where you have Marvel Legendary. And again, with the plethora, the vast plethora already, the library of characters, heroes, villains, everything in between. But that is much more static, much less adaptable. It is, again, a different beast. It is taking characters and mishing them together and never knowing if you might not even get hardly any of one or two characters in that hero deck that you were drawing from in the first place. The customization, the variability is there on what you want to do and put them together. But again, there's a lot more overhead to that, especially when you start adding in the expansions. Okay, I haven't played with X-Men in a while. Okay, I haven't played with Guardians of the Galaxy in a while. What does this keyword do? What does this keyword mean here? Oh, I need to go look that one up. Now, again, it's not a make it or break it. But with this, when I add something in, when I add it in, I add Hela in, or I add Taskmaster in, or I swap out challenges, or I do the Infinity Gauntlet, boom, I read one or two things and I know exactly where things stand in terms of the difference in complexity. And so that's why I think it falls somewhere in the middle and it fills its own niche that is unique and does not necessarily fit in with either of the other two. There is definitely an overlap with Marvel Legendary in the similarities, but it is more like Pandemic rather than more like Aeon's End or Dominion, if that makes sense. So do I recommend it? It's not for everybody. There are clearly heavy strategic gamers that are not going to like this. Like I said, or they're going to complain it's too easy. Like I mentioned, you need some of those other expansions to add and to show off and to make this game truly shine. And if you're willing to invest in some of those, it's going to be worth your while because it does fit that narrative of what works for me in that sense. But if you don't like moving miniatures around in a circle, if you don't like the lack of great depth in terms of differences between the heroes, those are going to be potential things that are going to turn you off. But I can already tell you that in terms of gameplay, ease of the table, fun factor, and being able to play with everybody, the price of this game per play for me is going to be significantly less than a lot or most of the other games in my collection, and I've already had it only less than a month. And that's only going to decrease over time, which is just great. So, that's what I think. It's probably going to get, and I wasn't planning on doing this, but maybe a 4.5 out of 5. And I mean that in the sense that 5 being, I'm going to keep it for my collection forever. 4 being, I'm going to keep it most likely forever, but it may have a chance of, somewhat down the line if my tastes change. 4.5 in the sense that, like I mentioned, some of those expansions, I could see myself selling down the line. But ultimately, I think the core with those 3, the Infinity, the Sinister Six, and the stretch goal box are going to stay, period. And that's why I'm sort of going in between. There you go. That is Marvel United and all that it contains. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your concerns. Let me know if you like it, if you don't like it. That's where I stand. Hope that was useful. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you around. Stay classy.